I'm Alison Miller. I'm the Deputy Director for Management at the Earth Institute here at Columbia, and I'll be moderating tonight's event. So today we're going to talk about how women navigate careers in sustainability, exploring the female perspective on professional development and advancement in this growing field. An increasing number of women are pursuing careers in sustainability and rising to leadership positions in this industry. Women also tend to outnumber men in sustainability professional programs, and so we want to look at how that impacts the career trajectory of these women as they enter and advance in the field. This event was actually conceived in the classroom late last fall, when during a professional development session, a female student asked how this guidance could be changed or differed from the female perspective. And so the resulting conversation was something that we thought ought to be open to the broader Earth Institute community. And so it inspired us to put together this event. I think we all know that this event comes at a unique time in our country, from the women's marches both last January and last month, which are helping to spur an unprecedented number of women running for public office, to the Me Too and the Time's Up movements that seek to uncover and address sexual harassment and gender bias that is still far too common in our society. So to address these topics, we've assembled a panel of impressive women working in diverse sustainability roles, including sustainability finance, green building, corporate sustainability, and environmental policy. The panelists work or have worked in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. Tonight, we'll speak to some of the specific challenges and opportunities for women in the sustainability field, as well as some of the universal challenges that professional women face today, such as finding mentors, managing family responsibilities, navigating organizations, dealing with bias, and more. We'll aim to explore these issues for women at various levels of their career and provide insight into leadership practices to help support career growth. We were conscious of these issues even as we were planning this event. Mindful of the fact that you and some of our speakers have childcare duties to return to tonight, we actually set our start time an hour earlier than we normally do for these public events, so that those who need to can leave at 6 or go on to class. The format of the panel will be 45 minutes of moderated conversation, after which we'll allow some questions from the audience. After that, we'll break for a reception where you'll have the opportunity to network with each other and the panelists and continue this conversation. So now you should all have a handout with the bios, so we can just get right into the discussion, but let me briefly introduce the panelists, starting with Mona, who's closest to me. This is Mona Benisi, who's the Senior Director of Sustainability at Simon Property Group. Next to her is Stephanie Johnston, Director of Sustainable Business at the Heineken USA Company. Next to her is Bhakti Mirchandani, Managing Director at FCLT Global. And then Melissa Wright, the Senior Associate on the Environment Team at Bloomberg Philanthropies. So please join me in welcoming our panelists. All right, so let's jump right in. So I'd like to ask you to start by telling us why you chose a career in sustainability, and specifically how you ended up in your current role, so how you established and maintained that pipeline for advancement to get to where you are today. Let's start with Mona, and we can go down the line.
Sure. Well, hi, everybody. Wow, so many women in the room. We have a few female. Can you hear me well? Okay, better. Hi, everyone. Well, my name is Mona Benisi. I'm the Senior Director of Sustainability at Simon Property Group. I'll just say a word to that because people typically don't know what Simon is. We are the biggest retail real estate developer, owner, and operator, so shopping malls, and I'm sure everybody has been to a Simon mall in the country. The closest one is the Woodbury Commons Premium Outlet. We have properties in the US as well as internationally, Asia, and Europe. How I got into sustainability has actually a little bit to do with my background. So I grew up in Germany most of my life. And in Germany, you know, sustainability is way ahead of the US. And so it's, you know, my education in the field started way earlier. So especially also before I had lived in Germany as a child, I lived in Iran for a bit. And living in a city like Tehran, you are actually faced with real environmental issues on a daily basis, you know, power, pollution, water scarcity. So, you know, when I moved to Germany, it was easy for me to kind of buy into the sustainability topic, especially seeing how a country can kind of take the problem, the environmental challenges and risks, and really mitigate it. And from a company perspective, from a corporate perspective, how you can actually create most of the time a business case to tackle sustainability issues. So from there, I studied international business in Germany, Nuremberg, and then I focused on some environmental management classes. I went on and I worked for Siemens, actually, for my first role. And I worked my way from business development to supply chain, looking at sustainability in the supply chain. For a company like Siemens with over 100,000 suppliers, sustainability of their supply chain is very important. And then I managed to work for the chief sustainability officer and worked on a variety of different sustainability projects to developing sustainability strategies for the different sectors of Siemens, be it healthcare or energy, to coming up with a carbon neutral strategy that they're actually pursuing now. So they want to be carbon neutral by 2030. And so really from there, then my journey brought me to Columbia University. I decided to take a sabbatical leave and come to New York, do a grad degree in environmental studies here. And then really from there, I worked at the Earth Institute for a little bit. I did a fellowship with Environmental Defense Fund and leveraged my network then in New York to get to my current role. So long story, but that's kind of how I ended up where I am today.
Thanks. Cool. Do you want me to jump in? Okay. Ooh. I hope this works. All right. Hi, everyone. So I'm Steph Johnston, and you might be able to tell from my accent that I'm also not from the US. It was even more of an emerging field, if you like, when I first graduated, and it definitely wasn't available as a program for me to study or anything like that. And perhaps even if it was, I may not have gone down that route, because I always sought to be something of a generalist when I was studying and even when I went into my early career, because I just frankly accepted that I hadn't decided yet what I wanted to do in life. And I just decided to let it come and just follow my skills and my interests as and when they kind of unfolded, and opportunities. We all know that career paths are somewhat opportunistic as well. So I actually studied politics, philosophy, and economics at Oxford in the UK, and then I studied Middle Eastern studies with Arabic in my master's program, which at the time, again, was just following my interests. I'd always had this kind of interest in intractability of the war in the Middle East and wanted to understand some more about the culture and the region. So, and that took me randomly into an organization that actually worked in corporate communications and did some work in the Middle East as a region. So I started in a totally different area. So for anyone who's looking for a career switch, it's definitely doable. But yeah, so, and I followed my kind of interest in corporate communications, and eventually that narrowed down to reporting, which doesn't sound like the most enticing field to end up in, but actually it is all about the performance of big companies and how they hold themselves accountable to their stakeholders around that reporting. So there were elements of work I was doing around financial reporting, and eventually that it became apparent to me that my interest actually lay around the sustainability side of reporting, and ultimately I refined my interests from there to know that was the field I really wanted to specialize in, and sustainability, not just sustainability reporting. So it was a little bit of a convoluted route, if you like, and partway through that journey, I decided to have a life adventure and move to the States, which is not a small undertaking in itself. But I was able through, again, I didn't make the ideal job shift when I moved over here. I was quite opportunistic about it. I found a company over here that was looking for a specialist sustainability reporting person, and I had that skill set, so I moved over here on that basis. And opportunities unfolded. I was working with companies when I was in Europe, including Heineken, and so I maintained my network and eventually was asked to interview for this role when it came up in the US. So I guess my learning from that story is that the job world is always changing, we're always changing, new things are emerging, new opportunities are coming out, and so in terms of maintaining my pipeline for advancement, I think just never sitting still and never necessarily letting my interest or my ambition stand still, because the world around us is always changing, and I have ended up finding my passion and my deep interests, and I'm now teaching a course in the SUMA program around circular economy, which is a specific interest of mine in this field. So I think our interests evolve, and embracing that is part of the excitement of this field, I think.
So my name is Bhakti Mirchandani. I'm the local of this panel because I grew up an hour north of here. I did all my schooling in the States. I went to Harvard studied chemistry in undergrad, and later went back for an MBA and an MPA. In terms of my interest in sustainability, I started off more as someone who pivoted back and forth between mainstream finance, hedge funds, Wall Street, and kind of pro-poverty alleviation finance. So back in the late 90s, there was only really microfinance and social enterprise. There was no impact investing yet. But I left equity research to take a role in microfinance product development. By the time I was done with business school, they started to do microfinance, collateralized loan obligations, and other structures. I took a mainstream job at Lehman Brothers and convinced them to do some very interesting microfinance transactions and set up a microfinance group. So that was very exciting, and then the firm blew up. The whole world changed. I moved to Asia and helped to be part of the early team that started impact investment banking in Asia. Did the first microinsurance transaction in Asia. And then the microfinance crisis happened in India. For those of you who were interested in the field back then, there were some farmer suicides in southern India, and that led to repaying microloans becoming illegal. Deal volume has dropped by 92%. On a personal level, I fell into a sewer, which is one of the horrible and crazy things that happen to you when you're living in an emerging market and making a difference and having a great time. Something can just come out of left field, and between those two events, it seemed like a pretty good time to come home. I set up Barclays' international development banking coverage business. And then I went to a structured credit hedge fund for 5 years, which I just left a week ago, and I started a new job yesterday. So I now work at a think tank focused on long-termism in business and investment decision-making. The hedge fund I was at, I convinced them to sign the UN principles on responsible investment, but real fundamental change takes time. So in terms of how to make such wide pivots in your career, I'll say a couple of things. One is that relationships are incredibly important. So if you look at my career, there are certain people that when they move, they look to bring people they already know with them. But when they get new responsibilities, they look to bring people with them. So having strong relationships is very important. And I also think being generous is very important. If you're extremely generous and helpful to everyone you meet, they'll always be happy when you reach out to them. Opportunities will fall in your lap. And I've been pretty generous with my expertise in terms of serving on boards, helping anyone who wants a job search, and that has led to far more opportunity than I had even sought after.
Great. I don't want to take too long in my summary, but I also don't want to be too pithy and just say that my career path has been determined by happenstance and gut instinct and a little bit of hard work, but that's kind of how it's been lots of opportunity and relationships. So I've been fairly consistent from undergrad through my grad program. I have occasionally taught here at SEPA in the ESP program, which I also went through. I may be the exception on the panel. I've never worked in the private sector unless you count those few summers at a honky-tonk bar in Texas. So I started my career thinking that I was going to be combining my interests in essentially social services and the environment. I thought that food policy was my place. And I started working on food stamp policy in California and quickly realized I was not constitutionally set up to do that work in the long term. Jumped on a job that, as you said, it was sort of opportunistic. I seemed to have the right skill set and found the place where I kind of spent, or the issue area that I spent the next 15 years, which was urban sustainability. So I worked for an organization that was focused on transit-oriented development, urban land conservation, and smart growth, essentially. And then came here to Columbia, did my MPA program, and then went on to work for the Mayor's Office of Sustainability here during the Bloomberg administration, and spent 6 years working for city government in a few different capacities, going from a policy associate position where I basically worked on almost anything they handed me, from sustainability reporting to plastic bag fees to green buildings to working with universities like Columbia on reducing their carbon footprints to meet a challenge of 30% in reduction in 10 years. Since I left the city back in about 2012. I went on to work for the Natural Resources Defense Council, essentially taking some of the green building and climate mitigation policy work and the programmatic initiatives that we ran here in the city of New York on the road. So working, recruiting with mayors from across the U.S. To take on similar challenges. And so there are now 20 different cities that are replicating the policy packages and working on reducing their carbon footprints, in part because of this, because of New York City's leading by example, but also the initiatives that we took at NRDC. From there, I pivoted and have now been with the Bloomberg Philanthropies environment team for about 2 years. So urban sustainability was my gig until I started with Bloomberg, which seems like, well, of all places, you should continue to do that work. But now I own the oceans and marine policy portfolio at Bloomberg Philanthropies, and I consult primarily on urban sustainability. So I would say what has been the constant throughout my career has been the solid relationships, the wanting to explore different ways to apply my skills, and the desire to travel.
Thank you. Do you think that the sustainability field is particularly well suited for women to advance, and why? Maybe we'll start on the other end this time, Melissa.
I would say yes, there's lots of opportunity. It is a relatively nascent field, which means that there's kind of only opportunity. In the 15 years, 20 years that I've been in the field, I've seen the types of jobs that are available become just even more professional and sophisticated and more prevalent. They're not in a niche B Corp. They're not only in certain areas of the country, San Francisco. There really so many more opportunities, and people are creating their own opportunities every day. Just hearing your story about how you go into a new organization or a new company and come with the good ideas. So I think that there's just huge opportunity. That said, I think in some fields where sustainability may be most needed or necessary urgently, there's probably more resistance and old guard power that may prevent this from coming to fruition without the kind of focus that sustainability professionals can bring. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for women and a lot of challenges still to be tackled.
I'll speak to the impact investing side of sustainability. In impact investing, a lot of the deals are private deals, so they're private investors investing in private companies, and there are often no disclosure requirements. And before you can market a deal effectively, it's very important to understand comparables. So what has gone on in the market, what is the structure, what is the pricing? And to get that kind of information, you need to have strong relationships. So if you're able to form relationships with leaders in the field, up-and-comers in the field, you'll have a huge advantage in sustainable finance. And I think women often have larger networks. They often put more energy into personal relationships. If you share a passion for sustainability, which all of you do, and that's why you're here, a lot of these professional relationships can be like friendships. You can get a lot of mutual benefit from them, and it'll give you a huge competitive advantage. So that's one thing I'll say. And the next one is that sustainable finance deals take a lot longer than in mainstream finance. That also makes it easier to build relationships and makes relationships more important. So from the relationship standpoint, you do have a clear advantage here in this room.
Great. I think I'll probably just build on that point. I think without wanting to make sweeping generalizations, because that would be a mistake, because this is all about individuals and personalities as well. But at the end of the day, the work that we do in the sustainability field is often about changing mindsets, because ultimately we're trying to change the world. And we can't change the world without changing mindsets. And I do think that certainly the women I've worked with and for lean more towards an empathetic outlook and an emotional connectivity that allows them to show empathy, not just towards people and planet, but even when it comes to reading a room and how it might enable us to change mindsets. So actually, I think the inbuilt empathy that we have as a gender is a tool we can leverage. That said, and that's definitely not to say that men don't have that by any means, but it's more to say that we do have innate abilities that we can draw on in this field. I definitely think influencing people is the biggest skill that I draw on every single day. And it's something you can definitely learn, but it's also something that I think we all have within us, and we all learn in our personal lives as well as in our professional lives. So from that perspective, I would say, yes, I think women have got a good chance in the sustainability field.
Yeah, I'll just add on a little bit. I think really, yes, sustainability is a growing field. The number of jobs are increasing, be it like in solar and wind industry. But really, I think in general, it's about asking yourself, is this something I enjoy? Do I want to do this? Do I enjoy being in this field? And if you do, I agree, if you have certain skill sets, you just mentioned the most important one. It's what I spent doing most of my day also, is thinking how I can get through to somebody. How can I, tag on to their agenda and their interests and their priorities? If you have those skills, it's great. And I think the other thing I will say is it's important to think about it if you want to go to in the field of sustainability. Think about the kind of companies you want to work for. You can work for the traditional companies, the corporate, the Fortune 500 companies, the investment banks, the management consulting firms, or do you want to go and work in the companies that are mission driven, social entrepreneurs or NGOs? So that's something to think about. And then most importantly is around what kind of culture do you want to be? So think about that. And so on one side is really the kinds of companies and then the rules, right? There's also a lot of different ways to do sustainability. You don't just have to be like a head of sustainability. You can be working as in a marketing role, in a finance role. So those are kind of some of the things to think about.
Great, thank you. So let's get into some of the challenges. What are some challenges that you have either observed or experienced directly, and how have you overcome those challenges? Anyone can jump right in.
I'll start. So I think really, I'll start because I think I recognize that there are a lot of challenges as a female in the general workplace. So I don't want to downplay that by any means. However, I can just speak from my experience and how I've kind of navigated my career. And I really think that, I haven't faced specific challenges because I'm a female. I have a lot of actually privileges in my company that men don't have. So from that side, maybe I have been lucky, or maybe it's kind of how I've been navigating my career. But I will say some of the challenges, specifically related to sustainability and how you manage sustainability. Yes, I can talk a lot about that, but I think the most important one is the perception of sustainability within companies, especially on the private sector, because that's where I've worked most of my life. Is really, I say a lot of times, we need a rebranding of the word sustainability. I try not to even mention sustainability in my slides when I want to present an initiative. I keep away from green, sustainable, CSR, all that stuff. And I've to be honest, I've actually had an executive tell me, hey, I thought you were a tree hugger, and I thought you're just going to cost me money, but hey, you actually, create value for this company. You're saving me a bunch of money, like come into meetings and stuff. So that's a big challenge, is kind of the perception that there is, especially in this country, around sustainability, and you have to be very strategic around how you navigate that.
I would support that 100%. I think I would agree in that the challenges I've faced as a female in the workplace aren't not necessarily particular to sustainability, and the challenges I faced in sustainability aren't necessarily specific to being female. That's probably how I'd put it. But there is a point at which beer is a male-dominated environment. There is no two ways about it. And sometimes you can, there are ways in which I have drawn on male perspectives to actually grow as an individual and as a female. So, I think I have a tendency to accommodate, to give you an example. And in the workplace, that can be a negative because it can mean that people perceive you as a walkover. So in some instances, I have made myself incredibly vulnerable by turning around to my male colleagues and saying, how the hell did you pull that off? Teach me that, teach me how you put your foot down so firmly and managed to get your own way. And so I've actually, in a sense, tried to compensate for perhaps natural tendencies, perhaps gender tendencies, I'm not sure which, by borrowing from the skill sets of people who are different from me. So I guess that's one tip to share. But then the challenges, as you rightly mentioned, in terms of getting people's mindset to not see you as sort of just a wishy-washy or a woolly role that just exists as a sidebar and, let's ignore her and put her in the corner kind of thing. I would say that my way of dealing with that, I tend to use a term called tempered radicalism, which I find very helpful in the sense that if I was a radical all the time, I think I would be ignored, quite frankly. And yet I can be a tempered radical in the way that I operate by making people understand that there is a real challenge, but I'm willing to meet them halfway on it. And so I honestly think that's the only way that I have been able to survive in a role where very often I'm walking into a room that nobody wants me in the room. Mm-hmm. If I was going in all guns blazing, whatever gender I was, I think I would be walking out without the same results. So read up about tempered radicalism. It's a real thing, and I do recommend it as an approach in sustainability.
So, like the other two panelists, I'm going to divide the comments into challenges in sustainability and challenges of being female in the workforce. Do you think that at times at companies they like to have someone who cares about the planet, poverty, but they don't necessarily want to put a lot of substance behind it? So at times I felt like I was there for a dog and pony show to be kind of shown to clients and to potential recruits as a kind of an example of this is what we do without the heft behind it. And the way that when I was younger, used to get momentum behind things is just work extremely hard, do a lot of other people's jobs. It was very easy for them to take it over the finish line on the things that I could not do. And as I've gotten older, what I've learned is that that's not a scalable strategy, right? And your time and energy is a depletable resource. So I've learned to spend my time, rather than kind of making it very easy for people who are disinterested but skilled, to kind of preaching to the half-converted. So kind of motivating people who have something in their background that could kind of help a spark turn into a fire if they actually care about something. And it could be that they have a connection to a particular country or an issue and just kind of doing the research to find out who they are and kind of motivating them. And then that's something that is actually I can kind of scale and have lasting influence. In terms of being female in the workforce, I'd say there are two things. One is that, and there are a lot of studies on this, that women do a lot of non-promotable work. This is just like the housework at home, the chores at work. And the problem with doing non-promotable work is it's not that, your tendency to be a team player or helpful gets you to volunteer to do it once in a while. But if you do too much non-promotable work, then your career is kind of going to go nowhere. You're just going to stagnate. And studies have shown that men, when women are in kind of groups, don't do as much non-promotable work. So it's just something that you should obviously do some to be helpful, but also label when you're doing it and request that it be shared. And then the other piece is on power. I've worked in a lot of all-male environments. And who here has heard about Amy Cuddy or the power poses? So there is and for those who haven't, she's done a TED Talk. It was the second most popular TED Talk that was given, and she's a national best-selling author. So the basic concept is when you slouch, when you sit in a closed manner, you take away from your personal power, both in how you're perceived and how you perceive yourself. So if you want to feel more confident, the way to sit is like this with your arms on the chair, even do a victory sign when you're in the ladies' room before an important meeting. So there are all these things that you can do to kind of subtly change the way you feel about yourself, even if you don't realize this, and the way others perceive you.
Where do I want to go from here? So I have also worked in predominantly male environments, specifically when I was focused so much on energy efficiency, working with energy engineers, building managers, and folks who are property owners. I think I had the privilege while working in those environments to also be in a position where I was either helping to devise policy, manage large groups of people where they were participants in the initiative, or they reported to me. So in that context, I would say I spent a lot of time feeling cowed or doubtful about my own expertise in that context, and feeling or disempowering myself, essentially, by believing that other people knew more, had more experience, and therefore could not respect the role that I was playing in that workplace. So fast forward about 10 years, and the way that I spend my time now, spending a lot of time with people who know so much more than me on nearly every subject, because working in philanthropy, one of the great things about it that I appreciate every day is that people are coming to tell me about their fantastic new ideas and all of their incredible accomplishments. But so the position that I am in now is acknowledging that my role and the role of many sustainability managers and people who are managing groups of people in predominantly male workplaces is to ask the right questions and to identify the gaps, to be the one who is not just accepting what they're being told as the truth and therefore the way it must be, but rather challenging the way that things have been done and lending my own creative skills to the initiative, whatever we're trying to accomplish. So I would say those are two kind of sustainability and female-related comments, because in the realm of sustainability, you may or may not, I didn't have any particular deep expertise. I did not go in as a scientist or have an MBA, and so I was applying the skills of management, communication, analysis, and just generally my curiosity and desire to do something about the state of the planet. And those are what have led me down the path. And those at some point didn't feel like enough. And what I'm much clearer about now, years down the line, is that that is what's missing in a lot of workplaces, is that that ability to view things from a different perspective, see the future in a different way, mobilize people around new ideas, and do the necessary analysis to get you there.
Thank you. I think you guys spoke to a lot of the common concerns that we hear from a lot of our students, and some tips that they can address them. One specific obstacle that many women face is establishing this work-life balance. So maybe you could talk about some advice or tools that you found helpful for managing this.
Sure. Okay, so Really, I think you have to prioritize your own objectives and then find a company, a culture that will allow you to succeed in it. So, if you want to play tennis every day for 4 hours after work, maybe even like in the real estate industry where I am, there's some real estate firms that are led by ex-investment bankers. So what the culture is there, right? So you have to kind of align your priorities with the culture of the company. And, I think today, in the age of the internet and all the networks that we have available, it's very easy to get a sense of the cultures of the company. So do your homework and research it. So that's kind of one. And then two, I think really my experience has been, you just have to prove yourself at the beginning sometimes. Once you prove yourself, once you show that you can perform, once you establish trust, my ex-boss told me, like, I don't care where you work. You can be laying at a beach for all I care, because I know you will deliver. I know you'll be at that customer meeting when you have to be there. So I think those are that's my two general advices.
Yeah, I would probably say there's two things as well. I think knowing where to draw the line and knowing your value are the two things I would definitely point towards. Knowing where to draw the line is, as Mona says, everyone pulls their weight when they're starting out, and sometimes they pull all-nighters as well. And believe me, I've been there and I've done that. And but knowing where to draw the line is saying, okay, I can do this, but I can't do this every day. And this is my limit, and I know what it is. And that kind of steps into the point of knowing your value. There will be a point where you've done enough all-nighters to know how an all-nighter works and where you add value and where you stop adding value. So it becomes a point where you can say, I actually lose my productivity at this point. I need to find a better way to work. And that's the point at which you have a conversation around where you can and can't add value on an ongoing basis. And knowing where to draw the line is also culturally saying, okay, I'm really not giving up immediately, but pointing to the issues, dealing with any issues as it relates to work-life balance very frankly, and being communicative about those. And if issues are not resolved, knowing when to draw the line and say, my life is worth more than my work, and I need to establish the balance a bit better. And that's about knowing your personal value and what value you put around your different hobbies and activities outside, or friends and family outside of work as well. Whether you choose to have a family or not, I think those things remain important. So, and one thing I would say personally speaking is that I don't have a family right now, in terms of not having children, and I think being supportive of other women who are in that situation is also something that you'd want to give and receive. Because if you ever found yourself in a situation where you were the one that had to leave for childcare, you might want to just, be nice to the person who has to leave for childcare in case it's you one day, and you'd hope that someone would pay it forward, right? So I would say let's help one another in that situation too.
So I'll say three things. One is, if the only thing you care about is career maximization, and that's totally fine, you still make an investment in your long-term productivity by making the time to eat right, exercise, get enough sleep, maintain personal relationships, strong personal relationships, not just personal relationships, and read both about your field and in general. Because all of those things will make you more successful in the long run, and all of those are investing in the long run. So even though you're not doing one more unit of work or producing one more widget, that will make you more valuable in the long run, and that's what you want. Second thing is that if you have outside commitments that are serving on boards or teaching or any of a number of things that take you away from your work but add value either to other parts of society or you think will help you to add more value in the long run, it's important to demonstrate to whoever your employer is or boss is or client that those things are valuable, and find ways to subtly show that those things actually create value to them and to their organizations and more broadly. So that's something that will help you have more leeway. And the third thing is I'll say to those who are kind of contemplating parenthood or are new parents, and that is that, and I'm not a parent yet, but I'm now old enough that most of my friends are, so I can speak from their experience. That's that just by being a good parent, you end up with coming up with lots of opportunities. You could serve on your child's PTA because you're worried about their curriculum and you meet someone who can help you in your business or vice versa. So there's opportunity everywhere as long as you're focused and you look at it. and you look for it and develop it. So every minute that you're not in the office is not kind of a minute you're not working. There are all sorts of ways to work while you're doing other things.
Okay.
I would agree with all of the above, and would add that to the degree that it's possible for you to establish your boundaries and set other people's expectations for your work style, the way in which you work best, even the times of day when you are going to be the most productive, i.e. not at midnight, the better. The other thing that I have asked for and received in negotiating compensation has been professional development support, and it has taken the form, a few different forms. One, an executive coach, but otherwise a commitment from my employer to send me to regular workshops, a stipend to participate in professional development networks. So to give me an outlet and an opportunity within the structure of my job to spend the time doing the kind of reflection and personal and professional growth that I think make that balance more possible. I do have 2 kids. I have 2 kids in elementary school, and that work-life balance is no joke. And it's also somewhat of a blessing because it's a hard deadline. Daycare will close, and your children need somewhere to go. So I would say all of that. The other tip, I liked your pose, and actually I spend a lot of my time when I'm on the phone standing up for that very reason, so that I'm able to kind of physically embody the kind of power and strength that I need to communicate. The other tip that I have is stop apologizing so much for just doing what you need to do and being who you need to be. And that relates especially to the work-life balance. I'm not apologizing for going to pick up my children from daycare. I'm thanking people for spending a little extra time at the office doing that non-promotable work when I can't do it for them. But I'm not going to spend my kind of personal strength and kind of emotional energy on apologizing for something that is important to me in my life. So,
Thank you.
big tip.
That's a great tip. Before we get to audience questions, maybe you can really quickly give any one additional piece of advice that hasn't been mentioned that you think would be helpful to the audience.
Maybe one thing would be, especially when it comes to corporate sustainability, traditional corporate sustainability roles in Fortune 100, 500 companies, you are the person who determines what the trajectory of your career is. So I think Bhakti mentioned it. A lot of times, you may start off and it's like a compliance. You're there because some investor mentioned you should have a sustainability person, so now they hired a sustainability person, and here you are trying to do major initiatives, but everybody's like, yeah, just publish that report and it's okay. It's your job to then take it from compliance to doing, maybe you start, the next level is you do a couple of energy efficiency projects, some renewable projects that have great returns, and then you kind of show what innovative projects you can do and how you can create overall value for the company. So there's different steps and there's maturity curves for sustainability, but nobody's going to ask you for it, so it's your job to really define those steps and expand your role. And then also when you do that, second piece of advice would be don't be shy when you're negotiating. When your role is expanding, your responsibilities are expanding, then ask for that promotion. And if you don't ask for that, if they don't give you that promotion, then ask for, I heard it here, executive coach, or I want to do a part-time, MBA program or more vacation. Just one personal anecdote, when I was wanting to leave Siemens to do my master's program, I was like, okay, well, I have to quit because I want to come to New York City and do my master's program. There's no way for me to do that part-time. And I was talking to a friend of mine, male friend, and he's like, why? just ask them to give you sabbatical leave. And I'm like, well, it's a year and a half. They've never done that before. They're not going to do it. And, and he's like, yeah, we'll just ask them to give you sabbatical leave and ask them to pay for it. I'm like, both? Really? Maybe I could get them to give me the sabbatical leave. Well, long story short, I got them to give me both, but it was not my idea. So, don't be shy. And then if you don't get what you're asking for at some point, I think it's also a pretty clear message, so you know where you are at least with that employer.
Apart from wearing a t-shirt like this, which is always a conversation starter in the room, I would say counterintuitively that my tip would be to be vulnerable. I don't think there's enough humanity around in the workplace. I think we're all humans. We're all imperfect. That's what makes us human. And I think actually by going around pretending to be all that, actually we're making it harder for one another to succeed. You'll find that people are more vulnerable with you when you're more vulnerable with them. That is saying openly where you're struggling and where you find your own imperfections are catching up with you. People immediately step in to help when you tell them you need help. If you've never asked for help before, you might never have experienced it. But I would say it's one of the biggest lessons I've learned in the workplace, that the more vulnerable you are, the more willing people are to be human with you and move along and help you to get where you want to go. I'm not a fan of a world that pretends that everything's great and rosy plastering success everywhere. Sometimes we have to learn how to fail and how to improve on the basis of failure. And that requires of us that we are all vulnerable, not just women, not just people working in sustainability, but all of us. And if we're all working in a field that we admit requires more humanity around, I think we can be some of the first to really step up in order to be more vulnerable. So that would be my advice.
Wow, Stephanie, that's really thoughtful. And it's very, very true. I found that when you get really frustrated and you just mention something offhand, even though you're usually very kind of even keel, people end up liking you a lot more after that. So it's always a surprising thing. So in terms of additional advice, one thing I'll mention, a lot of you in this room may be recently out of school or kind of at the earlier stages of your career, and everyone has a perpetual search for the perfect mentor and sponsor. So the mentor to give them advice and the sponsor to open access to their networks. One thing I'll say to you is that as you get into your 40s, 50s, 60s, you want to be productive over 40 years, it's really important to focus on your peers. Your peers, the people who are coming up, who are a little bit younger than you, who need a little bit of help, because those mentors and sponsors will retire. They will stay in their jobs and not be as interested in just collect a paycheck. There are a range of things that they can do. They can start other businesses, and you need, and the time when the person sitting next to you who has exactly the same profile as you becomes a really big deal is pretty short. So if you think long term, even if you end up being the most successful person of everyone you know, you'll need great people by your side to help accomplish things. So I'd say it's great if you can get a great mentor or sponsor, but a lot of those mentors or sponsors in 10 or 15 years, you may not even remember much about them, or vice versa, but you will remember your peers, and that network is what's going to really carry you through over the course of your career.
I've gone last quite a few times on this panel. I agree again. You actually took what I was going to say, but that just means that there's a here. I have found not only that the peer network is important for professional development, but for that kind of external cheerleader. So having someone to give a call and just check your judgment, bounce something off of them, be able to hear how they may have handled something in a completely different field that will allow that kind of spark of creativity or innovation. So I think that that's hugely important. I guess the other thing that I would say, and something that I've appreciated and continuing to be involved with the Columbia community, is continuing to learn and being open to kind of learning experiences. and those kind of teachable moments for yourself. So learning from failure, but also being curious and opening yourself up to opportunities that don't feel like the most efficient use of your time or the most productive way to get from A to Z, but that the journey will allow you to pick up some really valuable lessons. So I think that staying involved with the Columbia community, I've really enjoyed the opportunities to teach, because I learned from the students, and being exposed to the other to the organizations that are doing different types of work and thinking about management challenges from their perspective have just been a great learning opportunity that have benefited me professionally.
Why don't we take a question or two from the audience? I think we have some mics. You want to go over here?
Thank you very much. This has been super helpful. I think my question is probably most geared towards Bhakti, but just generally on impact investing. What are some of the hurdles and challenges around measuring impact investing, and how do you kind of get investors over that line in proving that there is kind of that investment case?
So I'd say with impact investing, a lot of what happens is there's a focus on innovation, and innovation is hard to scale. So you would spend a lot of time coming up with a particular new deal structure, and there wouldn't be a way to either have a large enough investment for a lot of investors to be interested. So for example, the largest allocators, the pensions, except for smaller pensions, so the average large pension, sovereign wealth fund, impact investing is just a non-starter for a lot of them, because their investment minimums are so large that it's not a fit. So for those types of organizations, an ESG strategy is probably, or environmental social governance screenings, or SRI strategy is probably a better fit, because they have these requirements that they can't be more than a certain percentage of an investment, and it's just not worth their time to look at small investments. So that's one hurdle. For other investors, if there's kind of a new structure, it's just not something, it just takes a lot of their time to scale. So a lot of times investors who end up focusing on impact investments are foundations or high net worth individuals or groups that have greater capacity to take risk and a longer term horizon. Did that answer your question? Mm-hmm. Great.
And other questions? Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. So my name is Lindsay. I'm currently a student here at ZIPA. And my question is, what kinds of skills, both hard and soft skills, would you say have enabled you to take your career to the next level and achieve the management and director positions that you currently have?
Maybe I'll start with that. I think so. One we mentioned earlier was influencing people. So that's like really the most important one, I would say. Also, collaboration in general. I mean, I know it sounds like, oh, we have to collaborate in teamwork, but you really do. The reality is, especially in the U.S., corporate sustainability departments are small. You're not going to have, 6 full-time employees typically. If you do, you're very lucky. So you need to leverage other departments, you need to leverage other employees, and everybody has a long list of to-dos. So you need to be able to collaborate with them to get things done. Getting buy-in, really like selling. What I do all day is I sell stuff. It's initiatives, they're sustainability initiatives, but it's coming up with ways to sell them. And then I think the most important thing is for yourself to stay sane, at least. You have to have your own overall vision, your own overall objective that you're working towards. Sometimes it may not align with what the company is trying to do, but you still have to kind of have your own vision and then break it down into smaller steps as in how you're going to get there. So just as one example, if I want to set science-based targets around greenhouse gas emissions and I'm dealing with somebody that doesn't believe in climate change, maybe I don't talk about greenhouse gas emissions and I don't talk about there's a whole group around science-based targets, but hey, energy is a huge component in our operating expense and we should look at reducing energy. So, taking detours like that.
That's a
good point. Yeah, I think in terms of hard skills, those have changed on a role by role basis, and they're always going to be subject to the type of environment that you're working in as well. But from a soft skills perspective, just to dig into the kind of influencing people bit a little bit more, I think we don't spend enough time either when we're looking to move our careers forward, and I'm speaking very generally here, but I do think it's true of people trying to understand what makes organizations tick. Like, how do they work? How are businesses structured? What's making them function? What's the business model? Where's the power seat? How is this business being driven? Who are the people who are influencing the direction it's moving? Those things will come into play not just in terms of assessing the cultural opportunity at an organization, but also in terms of influencing people once you're in an organization. So going into an organization without understanding what makes it tick, whether that's how it makes money or how it creates value in its own space, is a big mistake in my book, because I think if you spend a little more time getting to understand that, you will make a better assessment of not just the opportunities presented to you once you're in a role, but even before you get there, whether this is the right role for you.
So I give kind of the general advice that you give to every college student, which is you should know a couple of things really well and a lot of things to some degree. So I think that'll give you a lot of flexibility to work in your career, because the world is rapidly changing. One thing that helped me far more than I ever could imagine is writing skills. So I'm a very strong writer, and from the hedge fund that I work for to this job I started a day ago, and now I have to write this major deliverable for them. The speed at which you get opportunity, if you are very good at written communication, is immense. The other thing that I'd say is very important, and you'll get this with experience, is how do you come to an intuitive answer on an analytical question quickly? So there's a way where you have a big team, which in its sustainability today in the US, as Mona pointed out, is probably not going to happen in the near term. So if you had a big team, you would have them run a full analysis, and you would aggregate what they came up with and then come up with an answer. But if you are a team of one, and you have a very senior role, but you have maybe one person working for you, or maybe nobody, and you still have to come up with answers quickly, just trying to figure out shortcut ways to do rigorous analysis will be extremely valuable.
I would say becoming very comfortable with ambiguity and understanding who you are, what you want to achieve, and planning out plans A, B, C, and D, so that if and when opportunities arise and the timing becomes ripe, that you're ready to execute when you have your moment, or the access to the right person, or somebody was finally influenced, maybe not by you, but by some other person on the board that now really wants that initiative to take place yesterday. And so being clear about what you're trying to achieve, but also be willing to be flexible enough to operate in an uncertain or ambiguous environment. I think that's one of the biggest kind of soft skills that I've had to apply in the various positions that I've had. In terms of hard skills, writing, and I don't know if oral communication just in general, being able to think on your feet and being able to work with people to problem solve in real time. I think that's a huge a huge need in the kind of spaces where you're creating something new.
Thank you. I think that's probably a good place to stop.
Yeah.
And I want to thank the panelists for joining us tonight.